Behind every hospital door, there's a dark secret waiting to be uncovered. Want to know the truth? Hit that subscribe button and don't look away, because once you enter, there's no turning back. Let's dive into the darkness. The hospital was eerily quiet that night, with only the faint hum of fluorescent lights breaking the silence. Nurse Lisa had just begun her graveyard shift in the ICU. It wasn't her favorite place to work. The air always felt heavier there, as if weighed down by unseen eyes. As she passed by room 309, she paused. The door was ajar, and a man sat on the bed, staring out the window. His hospital gown hung loosely on his gaunt frame, and his gray hair shimmered under the dim light. He looked fragile, as though a single touch might shatter him. Lisa frowned. That room had been unoccupied for weeks, marked for renovations. "Sir," she called softly. The man didn't respond, his gaze fixed on the darkness outside. Stepping into the room, Lisa felt an icy chill crawl up her spine. "Sir, you shouldn't be here. Are you lost?" she asked again, this time a bit louder. Slowly, the man turned to face her. His eyes, sunken and clouded, seemed to peer straight through her. "I'm waiting for her," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Lisa's brow furrowed. "Waiting for who? Can I help you find someone?" Before he could answer, the intercom buzzed. A patient in another room needed immediate assistance. Lisa turned to glance at the monitor, and when she looked back, the man was gone. Heart pounding, she stepped into the hallway, searching frantically. It was impossible for him to have left without her noticing. The ICU doors were locked, and no alarms had been triggered. Shaking her head, Lisa chalked it up to exhaustion and returned to her rounds. Later that night, Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As she checked patient charts, a low, mournful wail echoed down the corridor. The sound wasn't mechanical, it was human. It sent chills racing through her veins. Following the sound, she found herself back at room 309. The door, which she had firmly shut earlier, now stood wide open. A faint glow emanated from inside. Against her better judgment, Lisa stepped in. The bed was empty, but the room was freezing. Her breath came out in visible puffs, and her skin prickled with goosebumps. On the bedside table lay an old photograph of a woman, young, with bright eyes and a warm smile. Scrawled on the back of the picture were the words, "Eleanor, 1948, he's gone because of you." A raspy voice hissed from behind. Lisa spun around, her heart in her throat. The man was there again, his face twisted in anguish. "I don't know what you mean," Lisa stammered, backing away. The man's form flickered like a dying light bulb. "You couldn't save her. She trusted you." His voice cracked, and tears streamed down his hollow cheeks. Lisa's mind raced. "I wasn't here in 1948. I don't understand." Her voice trembled as fear tightened its grip. The man stepped closer, his feet making no sound against the linoleum. "She died alone, cold, waiting for you to come back." His face contorted into a mask of pain. The air seemed to grow heavier, pressing down on Lisa's chest. Her thoughts became a whirlwind of panic and dread. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though she wasn't sure why. With one final, anguished cry, the man vanished, leaving only the photograph behind. Lisa staggered out of the room, gasping for breath. Her colleagues found her moments later, trembling and pale. When she tried to explain what had happened, they dismissed it as stress. But Lisa knew what she had seen. The next morning, she returned to room 309, hoping to prove to herself it was all a hallucination. The photograph was gone, and the room was just as empty as it had been weeks ago. But on the bedside table, faintly etched into the wood, was a single word, Eleanor. Lisa never worked another night shift again. The pediatric ward had been sealed off for years, a forgotten relic in the hospital's east wing. Rumors swirled about why it had closed. Some said it was due to funding cuts. Others whispered about a tragedy no one dared to discuss. Yet, the eerie laughter of children was often reported echoing from the locked doors late at night. Nurse Karen didn't believe in ghosts. Practical and no nonsense. She prided herself on being grounded. So when the hospital director asked her to catalog the abandoned ward's remaining equipment, she didn't hesitate to volunteer. Just inventory and report, the director had said. Shouldn't take more than an hour. Karen entered the pediatric ward just before midnight. The air was stale, heavy with neglect. The walls were lined with faded murals of cheerful animals and vibrant rainbows. But the paint had chipped away, revealing cold, gray concrete underneath. Rows of empty beds stretched into the darkness, their metal frames casting twisted shadows under the flickering light. As she began her inventory, the quiet unnerved her. The only sounds were the scratching of her pen and the occasional creak of the building settling. But as she moved deeper into the ward, a faint giggle broke the silence. Karen froze, her pen hovering above her clipboard. "Hello," she called, her voice steady despite the chill creeping up her spine. There was no response. Shaking her head, she convinced herself it was just her imagination and continued her work. But the giggle came again, louder this time. It sounded impossibly close. She turned toward the sound, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. At the far end of the hallway stood a small figure. A child, a little girl in a hospital gown, her long dark hair obscuring her face. Karen's heart raced. "Sweetheart, what are you doing here?" she asked, taking a cautious step forward. "Are you lost?" The girl didn't move or respond. Karen took another step, and the girl darted into one of the rooms. Dropping her clipboard, Karen hurried after her. She entered the room, her flashlight scanning every corner. It was empty, save for an old rocking horse in the center, its paint peeling and faded. As she approached it, the horse began to rock gently, as though an unseen hand was pushing it. Karen's breath hitched. She backed away slowly, her instincts screaming at her to leave. But as she turned toward the door, she heard a chorus of whispers behind her. Children's voices, faint and overlapping. "Stay and play. Don't go. We're lonely." Karen spun around, but the room was empty. The whispers grew louder, filling her ears, drowning out her thoughts. The walls seemed to close in, the murals shifting, the painted animal smiles twisting into sinister grins. She bolted for the door, but it slammed shut before she could reach it. Panic surged through her as she yanked on the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Behind her, the rocking horse creaked, its movements more violent now. The whispers became a cacophony, and she could feel the air grow colder, heavier. "Please let me out," Karen cried, pounding on the door. Tears streamed down her face as she felt invisible hands tugging at her uniform, pulling her back into the room. Suddenly, the door flew open, and Karen stumbled into the hallway. She didn't stop running until she reached the safety of the main hospital wing. Collapsing against the wall, she struggled to catch her breath. When she tried to explain what had happened, her colleagues dismissed her story. The pediatric ward was empty, they insisted. No one could have been there. But Karen knew what she had seen and heard. And as she looked back down the darkened hallway, she swore she saw the little girl watching her, a faint smile playing on her lips. Karen never returned to the East Wing, but the giggles continued. Every night, the locked ward came alive with the laughter of unseen children, waiting for their next visitor. It was late into the night when Sarah, a young nurse at Oak Ridge Memorial Hospital, was on her usual shift. The hospital, with its sterile white walls and flickering lights, had always been unsettling, but she had grown used to it over the years. She had heard the rumors, whispers about the old elevator on the West Wing, the one that nobody used anymore. They said it was cursed, that it didn't stop at the proper floors, or worse, that it took people to places they should never go. Sarah had never given much thought to the tales. That is, until one night when she was asked to fetch supplies from the storage room on the 5th floor. It was a quiet night, the kind of eerie stillness that made the walls seem like they were breathing. Sarah had just finished with her last patient when she decided to take the elevator to save time. The West Wing was quiet, empty as usual. As the doors of the old elevator creaked open, she hesitated for a moment. The rusty metal frame of the elevator, its once gleaming buttons now dulled with age, stared back at her. But she pressed the button for the 5th floor, and the doors slid shut with a shudder. The elevator moved smoothly at first, its hum almost comforting. But as it reached the 4th floor, it suddenly jolted, and the lights flickered. Sarah blinked in surprise, but the elevator continued its ascent. The sound of the bell dinging at each floor became strangely distorted, like a distorted echo from a distant place. By the time it reached the 5th floor, Sarah noticed something strange. The doors didn't open. Confused, she pressed the button to open them. Nothing. The elevator seemed to stop, but just as she was about to reach for the emergency button, the elevator began to move again, downward. Sarah's heart raced. This wasn't right. The elevator was supposed to go up, not down. She frantically pressed the button for the 5th floor once more, but it ignored her. The floors blurred by, faster than they should have, as though the elevator was out of control. It stopped suddenly, and the door opened on the 2nd floor. But this wasn't the normal 2nd floor. The hallway was dimly lit, old, and abandoned, as if frozen in time. A chill crept down Sarah's spine. She could hear soft, unsettling whispers coming from the darkened hallways. They sounded distant, but they seemed to be calling her name. She stepped out hesitantly, but the doors slammed shut behind her before she could make her way down the hall. The elevator was gone. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. Sarah's breath hitched as she turned, her eyes darting through the darkness. There was something in the shadows. A figure, pale, gaunt, and hollow-eyed, emerged, its twisted form moving unnaturally, dragging its feet toward her. Terrified, Sarah ran back to the elevator, but the doors remained closed, no matter how hard she pounded on them. The figure grew closer, its face contorted in a grotesque grin, its hollow eyes never blinking. Then, the elevator door opened again, not on the 2nd floor, but at the bottom. The same doors that had once felt like a prison now beckoned her with their eerie presence. Desperate and frantic, Sarah lunged toward it, her hand reaching for the button inside. The elevator moved once again. This time, it didn't stop. As the elevator descended, Sarah realized the truth. She had never been on the 5th floor at all. She had never been on the 2nd floor either. She had been trapped in the endless cycle of the hospital's forgotten wing. The elevator didn't just transport people. It kept them, repeating the same twisted journey for those unlucky enough to enter. Sarah's screams echoed into the void as the doors closed, and the elevator continued its descent into a place from which there was no return. The elevator that never stops had claimed another soul,